been in this sermon series the last couple of weeks called Dream On, where we've been talking about what God dreams for our lives, what are the dreams that God has for our individual lives, and the dreams that God specifically has for this community. And what we've shared with you is that we believe that the dreams that God has for this community, if we put those into place, that those will also be the dreams that God has for your individual lives as well. I want to talk you through those 3 dreams one more time. We've been going through them each week. The first dream that we shared with you the first week was this, that we believe that God has called us to be a church that is about growth, that is about growing in our faith, that has a more than Sunday kind of faith, that we come in this place to be filled up, but to be sent out again. We believe this place helps us grow in our faith. The second is this: we believe that this church is a place of radical hospitality and invitation. That's what we're talking about today. That this be a place where we truly welcome each other the way that Christ has welcomed us. And then finally, that third dream is that we be the church that Richardson needs. And we'll talk about that next week, but I want you to be thinking about that this next week. What does it look like to be the church that Richardson needs? In other words, if our church ceased to exist tomorrow, would the community around us notice? What would they notice is missing? What are the needs of our community that we are called to give and be responsive to? These are the dreams that we have for this community. This is the way in which we believe God has called us to make disciples for Jesus Christ. One of the dreams that I have that is reoccurring in my life, it's probably a dream I have on a daily basis, is a dream about bread. I dream so much about bread. I eat a lot of bread, and when I'm not eating bread, I'm typically thinking about bread or dreaming about bread. I love bread. When I was a young girl, my family called me the bread queen. We couldn't go past Golden Corral because I really, really loved the rolls, and I would start crying if I saw the sign and we didn't stop. There was one week, I think it was at Thanksgiving, that my mom told me that she had put the dinner rolls on the table in the living room before we sat down to eat, and that I went in there and took a bite out of each roll, thinking that maybe if I just spread it out, they wouldn't notice that there's this little bite in each of the rolls. I love bread. Bread is one of those revolutionary things in our culture. Do you know that there are 550 million acres of wheat fields? Let that sink in for a minute. 550 million acres of wheat fields worldwide. Bread has revolutionized our culture, and what makes it so delicious and what makes it so good is this thing that we can't see. It's air. We put air into bread, and it makes it fluffy, and it makes it good, and it makes it something that I dream about. So I could just talk about bread for the rest of my time up here, but Eric told me that y'all wanted to hear something about the gospel too. So we need to talk about the gospel. Our parable today is about bread. It's about leavened bread, putting air into something, putting something that we can't see into something that we taste and experience. And it's this really brief parable in the Gospel of Matthew. It's in Matthew 13, and I want to read it to you. It's very short. It's one verse. It says in Matthew 13:33, he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until it was all leavened. The end. It's a little bit different than the other parables, right? Jesus taught through these things called parables that were like riddles or stories. And so instead of giving you the explanation, he instead gives us a story that we are able to pick apart together and dissect together and say, okay, so what was Jesus saying here? But in some of the other parables that Jesus tells, he gives us some sort of ending and then says, okay, now do you get it? And yet in this parable today, what we get instead of an ending is an image of what it looks like when yeast is added to bread. Now, yeast during this time was not considered something that was exactly good. In fact, it was something that was considered kind of corrupt. And so what Jesus is saying in this parable is that even when yeast was added, something good came out of it. But it wasn't something good that you could see, something that was obvious. Instead, it was something that was a little bit more elusive. something that wasn't maybe seen, but instead tasted, something experienced. I wonder when we're talking about a dream about hospitality and invitation, one that's radically so, if it's a little bit like bread, a little bit like the air in bread, the leavened bread, something that is elusive, something that we can't see, but when you experience it, you know it. You know that feeling. When you feel welcomed, when you don't feel like an outsider or somebody standing along the sides or uncomfortable or not considered. You know the feeling when you have been radically welcomed. But I think it's important for us to differentiate this morning the difference between being nice and being radically hospitable. Because it is so easy for us to come into this space and smile and nod at the people around us. But I don't know about y'all, but when I first started on staff here, I hesitated introducing myself to people. Because I didn't know the difference between a member who had been here for 40 years and a member who had been here for 2. And so it became embarrassing sometimes when I introduced myself to somebody and they assumed that I maybe already knew who they were. And so it's a struggle sometimes for us to connect with each other when we have up these walls or these assumptions where we think either people already know us or should know us, or that really we just need to kind of stay in our own pockets. One of the things I want to open your eyes to today with the Access community is this reality that we have in our service, in our community. This service was started at 5 p.m. on Sunday nights over 5 years ago. And so what that means now that we're at Sunday mornings at 11 is that we have a community of people, some who came from a 5 p.m. access service in the evenings, some who used to worship traditional or sometimes still do, but come over here and split their time half and half. Do you know that we actually have people who sing in the choir that come over here and worship with us? It's pretty cool. And then we have another pocket of people who just joined this past year, who came in January or sometime after, who have not known access in the past or in the evening, but instead have only known access at this time and in this space. So if you think about it, it's almost as if there are 3 different pockets of people, yet we are one worshiping community. And more importantly than that, we are one worshiping community in the midst of a larger system. I like to think about it as one patch in a larger quilt, that it's important to be knitted to the larger quilt, but first we have to be knitted to one another. So what does it look like for a community of people who've all come from different places and have different stories to really connect with one another? And not only that, but to have a dream about being a community that is radically hospitable, radically invitational. That thing that you can't always see, that thing that maybe is a little bit elusive, but when you experience it, you know what it's like. We have a story this morning about an experience like that. I want to invite our worship director, Eric Chakowski, to come on stage and share with you his experience.
Thanks, Julie. So one of the things that I would say at the beginning is, especially in the midst of encouragements from Julie and from JB, and this morning even from Kelly about a bilateral relationship with a church and really getting out what you put in, and even Kelly's encouragement this morning about finding places to plug in. I was not living in that way at this time, yet this church found me and met me where I was. And invited us in spite of that. So Val and I spent some years in Nashville after we graduated from college. I was out there about 4 years, and Val was out there for about a year. And we had an opportunity right around the time we were getting married to do something that I had never been able to do before because I'd been on staff at churches for the majority of my working life. But we had an opportunity to church shop together. As many of you may have had an opportunity to do so, we kind of got to play the field a little bit and see what was out there and experience some different things. And so we found 3 Methodist churches that we wanted to go visit. And so the first one we visited, and it was a big, beautiful church, beautiful campus, beautiful sanctuary, large choir, dynamic worship and preaching and all of these things. And we had a really great experience. But the experience that we had was an experience that many probably have in larger churches, and one of the things that we as a larger church should be aware of, and that is it was very easy, which was my plan all along, for Val and I to slip in and slip out, and nobody was wiser. And so it was a good experience, and we said, well, we might come back. But because of our intention to stay hidden, we were able to do so, and nobody was the wiser. The second church that we went to, another church with lovely people that were nice, and the worship experience was fine, but we just didn't feel compelled again to come back. And so the third week we went to a church. It was a larger campus, but they seemed to be in a little bit of a time of rebuilding because the sanctuary wasn't full, the classrooms weren't full, the parking lot wasn't full. And yet, when we got out of our car and we walked to the main entrance, we were greeted by a gentleman there who said, "Hi, my name's John." And I said, "Hi, John." And he said, I don't recognize you. You may have been here before, but forgive me if I don't remember meeting you. Are you visiting here? And I said, you caught us. It's our first week this Sunday, and I'm Eric, and this is my fiance Valerie. And he said, it's really great to meet you guys. We're so excited that you're here. And normally, where we would take a bulletin and then walk in, John left his post at the front door and walked us about 20 feet down into the narthex area outside the sanctuary and introduced us to a lady named Susan. He said, "Susan, this is Valerie and Eric. It's their first Sunday here, and I just wanted to introduce you." And there was nothing disingenuous. If he had been trained to do so, it seemed very natural. But he passed us off to Susan, and Susan said, "Hi, guys, we're really glad that you're here. One of the things that we like to do for first-time guests is we like to give them a freshly baked loaf of bread." Something they may have pulled from First Richardson, I don't know. We said, "Thank you very much." And she gave us a loaf of bread. And then Susan said, "Hey, let me walk you into the sanctuary." And Susan left her post at the bread table and walked us into the sanctuary and sat us down next to a married couple named Francis and Harlan. And I'll never forget Francis and Harlan. You can't forget those names for as long as I live. They were a couple in their 60s, empty nesters, who welcomed us again, asked about our life and our relationship and our jobs. Harlan owned a boutique shoe store that he was very proud of. And we went through the worship service. And what was interesting to me, especially as somebody who is a worship leader and a music director and a worship director who is very intimate, I care deeply about every little detail of flow and structure of a worship service and all of these things. This was not a church that we experienced transformational music at. This was not a church that the worship structure felt terribly thought out or rehearsed. You get what I'm saying? And yet at the end of worship, after a service that normally would not have been terribly transformational for us, Harlan and Francis said, "Hey, we're a part of a Sunday school class that Pastor Jim teaches. Would you guys want to grab a cup of coffee and then come to Sunday school in about 15 minutes? We said, "We'd love to do that." And we never left. The rest of our time in Nashville, that was our church home. And it was so interesting to see what the actions and how the actions of one or two or four people might set off a chain reaction.
One night to be confused, one night to speed up truth. We had a promise paid for hands and then away, both under influence. We had divine sense to know what to say. Mind is a razor blade.
A chain reaction. It's been called kinetic energy. I wonder if we might call it connecting energy. That when somebody connects with you, when somebody welcomes you radically and lovingly the way that Christ welcomes us with open arms, it might set off a chain reaction. I wholeheartedly believe in what Eric shared. That I hope that the preaching is wonderful. I hope that you thoroughly enjoy the music. I hope that you have a transforming experience here. But what I believe keeps you coming back, the stories I have heard from each of you, the story that we've heard from Eric, is when you have connected, when you have been welcomed, when somebody notices when you're not here. There's a book called Made to Stick that's a leadership book. And while it's not about invitation and hospitality, I wonder if that's a good image for us. That we might be a church, a culture that is made to stick. That when people come in these doors, that they feel radically welcomed and loved. That's maybe not something that we can put into words or actions, but you know it when you see it. You know it when you experience it. You know it when you taste it. One of the gifts about the parables is that it not only says what the kingdom of God is like, but it says that the kingdom of God is near. Over and over again, Jesus says the kingdom of God is near. And that's not just a sweet sentiment about the sweet by and by of someday. No, it is as near as a loaf of bread. And the kingdom of God and the images that we have in our scriptures are not about kings and queens and castles. They are about mustard seeds and yeast and bread and wheat. Things that are ordinary, yet things that are consuming, things that can infiltrate a system. I believe that God's dream for this community is that we have a welcoming spirit that is infiltrated through our walls. That you experience when you come into this place, and more importantly, as members, as family members of this congregation, that each of us do our part to make sure that chain reaction happens. That connecting energy. As we've talked about from week to week, what we believe is that in order to make God's dreams a reality in our life, we have to do our part. We have to be the people that God is calling us to be. We have to pursue the dreams and the purpose that God calls us to. So today we take part in a meal that may seem ordinary, but what we experience, what we taste, might just be transforming.